Let's now talk about how much caffeine you should consume in a day. Now, I just discussed a little bit about some of the different sources, but let's look again at caffeine in our lives and how much caffeine is in different things. Coffee in itself, usually in an 8-ounce cup, has about 70 to 100 milligrams of caffeine per cup. Tea, depending on what type of tea you get, green tea is going to have a little less, black tea a little bit more, is usually going to have about 30 to 50 milligrams per 8 ounces of caffeine, or 8 ounces of fluid, I should say, will have 30 to 50 milligrams of caffeine. Espresso, this could be something 100 to 150 milligrams per 8 ounces, actually sometimes even 6 ounces. Espresso is very, very potent. In addition to this, kind of tagging along that, cold brew coffee actually has more caffeine in it. Just the way it's brewed, caffeine stays within it longer. Energy drinks can have 100 milligrams of caffeine, all the way up to 300 milligrams of caffeine. Something like a Monster, usually like a normal sized Monster, is going to have about 160 to 140 milligrams. And then something like a Bang, that's the first one that comes to my mind. That's an energy drink. Some of those other ones too, C4 drinks, can have 200 to all the way up to 300 milligrams of caffeine, which is a lot of caffeine. If you consider it, that's 3 cups of coffee you're almost taking in one big slurp. Soda is also another source of caffeine, and different sodas can have different caffeine contents. There's some sodas that actually don't have any caffeine at all. Orange sodas, root beers, Sprites, those don't have any caffeine. And then let's say Pepsi, for example, a can of Pepsi has about 34 milligrams of caffeine. And then something like Mountain Dew actually has about 54, sometimes upwards of 60 milligrams of caffeine per can. All types of different sodas have different caffeines. The reason I'm describing all of this is I want you to realize that there is a lot of different things that have caffeine in them. So if you're looking at the optimal recommendations, it goes beyond your cup of coffee in the morning. There's probably some other stuff you're consuming as well. When you're just starting off, I usually recommend individuals to start with about 50 to 100 milligrams of caffeine per day. This is just a rough ballpark. And I should also say too, you don't need to have caffeine, period. If you feel good throughout the day, don't feel like you need to take it. This is just kind of for some extra alertness, extra pick-me-up. Don't feel like you need it. But if you're just starting out, that 50 milligrams to 100 milligrams, basically 1 cup of coffee or maybe 1 cup of tea, is a good starting point. See how that feels for you, because it's going to be very dependent on each individual, how well they tolerate coffee. Beyond that, you can get into general, more specific recommendations of 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. So let's talk about somebody who's 180 pounds or 81 kilograms. If you did the math, this would bring you to about 243 milligrams to 486 milligrams of caffeine is kind of that quote unquote safe range for daily use. You can actually get higher than this if you're going for performance, but for most people, I wouldn't recommend that. As we discussed earlier in the podcast, there's a lot of issues that can have you come from drinking a super large amount. So when you're first starting out, go towards that lower end and basically just work your ways up and see kind of what works for you. Your caffeine tolerance will largely depend on how much you should be consuming per day, depending on what your desired goals are. So if your desired goals are just some of the health benefits, maybe just from drinking coffee, or some of the alertness benefits from caffeine itself, you're going to need a very small amount to get that desired effect. And this desired effect, although it is prevalent, it is noted, it isn't like crazy. It isn't like magic, right? If you are somebody who's trying to optimize performance rather, you might want to do a little bit more caffeine simply because your goals are a little bit different. When we're talking about how long it actually takes till you feel an effect, Caffeine in itself usually takes about 30 minutes to an hour to actually get into your system. If you're taking it, let's see, through like mouth, so you're drinking it, and it can actually be absorbed pretty darn quickly, sometimes even 15 to 30 minutes if you don't have anything in your food. So if you're taking this before you want to do something where you want to get the effects of caffeine, I'd recommend about 30 minutes at least. If you don't have anything in your stomach, 15 minutes will actually get it in there pretty quickly. Otherwise, if you have food in your stomach, realize it'll probably be about an hour before you get the full alertness effects of caffeine. So that gives you a general guideline of how much caffeine you should take